Move on to deputations by appointment, and I think Anne Dingwall, you'd like to go first, Anne. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor Dalzell and councillors. Thank you for granting my deputation request. And there's a handout which I expect that you may have by now. Today we reach another milestone for the restoration of Victoria Square. You're being asked to consider and endorse the Victoria Square Restoration Plan, September 2015, before it's submitted to the Associate Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery for her approval. Statutory compliance, which is the subject of my deputation. The Council staff recommendations include that the Council note that the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority will be responsible for any statutory compliance in relation to the Victoria Square Restoration Plan. However, I wish to draw your attention to a legal matter relevant to the Council's decision-making obligations. It relates to the Restoration Plan's proposed cycling routes in Victoria Square. The Restoration Plan refers frequently to cyclists and cycle routes in or through Victoria Square. Now, I've highlighted, emphasised the particular wording. For example, links to Victoria Square for both pedestrians and cyclists. Victoria Square's pedestrian and cycle routes. Having well-connected pedestrian and cycle routes to get more people moving through Victoria Square. Pedestrians and cyclists have safe and suitably sized routes through Victoria Square. This project will improve the space provided for pedestrians and cyclists. Relevant, however, to your decision-making obligations is the legislation applicable to Victoria Square, namely the Christchurch City Reserves Empowering Act 1971. The Council staff report is silent in this respect. The City Reserves Empowering Act is an act to redefine the purposes for which certain reserves in the City of Christchurch are held. Schedule 3, number 35, defines the area known as Victoria Square, in terms of that Act, as all that plot of land known as Victoria Square, bounded on the east by Colombo Street, on the south by Armour Street, and on the west and northwest by the River Avon. And the schedule includes Victoria Square in the list of vested reserves for the purposes of lawns, ornamental gardens and ornamental buildings. Section 7, lawns, ornamental gardens and ornamental buildings, and it includes the statue of John Robert Godley, which is in the square. The pieces of land described in Schedule 3, which refers to Victoria Square, hereby declared to be vested in the corporation as reserves for the use of the inhabitants of the City of Christchurch for the purposes of lawns, ornamental gardens and ornamental buildings. Furthermore, in respect of cycling in Victoria Square is not vested as a recreation reserve, which would allow recreational cycling. Victoria Street, which previously traversed Victoria Square, was stopped in 1988. According to the NZTA, a bicycle is classified as a vehicle. From the wording of the City Reserves Empowering Act, it's evident that this Act doesn't provide for vehicle use within the area defined in this Act as Victoria Square. Vehicle use includes cycling. Endorsement of the Victoria Square Restoration Plan in its current form, referring to and providing for cyclists and cycle routes in or through Victoria Square, would be inconsistent with the City Reserves Empowering Act. I've discussed the matter of statutory compliance of the Victoria Square Restoration Plan with regard to cycle vehicle use in Victoria Square with the Associate Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery. She informed me yesterday the cycleway is on the other side of the river around the square, and the paths are only widened for increased walking, pushchairs, etc. Now, she also said that the widened paths, and this is verbatim, the widened paths in Victoria Square are not designed for cycle use. We've widened on the other side of the river. There's a proposed cycleway on the opposite side of the river to Victoria Square, adjacent to the courts. They want to keep bicycles out of there, meaning Victoria Square, so they can go round the other side of Victoria Square. The paths in Victoria Square are going to be widened. That's for safety for pedestrians and people with pushchairs and things like that. Thus, for your awareness, of your decision-making obligations in considering endorsing the Victoria Square restoration plan in the form presented to you with its provision for cyclists and cycle routes in or through Victoria Square, I've drawn the relevant matter of the Christchurch City Reserves Empowering Act 1971 to your attention. Finally, Chris Kisling, Professor Emeritus Transport Studies, is unable to speak with me today in this deputation. Nevertheless, to emphasise the wisdom of keeping cyclists' vehicles out of Victoria Square, he's provided a written statement for your consideration, which is attached. And he says, the deputation to the Christchurch City Council endorses the recognition that bicycles are not legally allowed to use Victoria Square. Well, it's the area as defined in the City Reserves Empowering Act. I know that the precinct project, when it speaks of Victoria Square, extends Victoria Square north of the river. But the City Reserves Empowering Act, when it refers to Victoria Square, it's south-east of the river. Confining cycle routes to outside the perimeter of Victoria Square, as defined in the Reserves Empowering Act, is a workable solution. Nevertheless, the safety implications of shared paths for cyclists and pedestrians cannot be overlooked. From a traffic design perspective, mixing slow, casual walking and strolling with commuting cyclists at speed is downright dangerous. Any intent to keep cyclists to a slow speed using signage will not contribute positively to the ambience of the place and will be very difficult to enforce. Wide pathways will inevitably beckon cyclists if they provide more direct routes. Condoning the trend to shared pathways for pedestrians and cyclists, where the cycling component involves swiftly moving commuter cyclists, will tend to exclude the mode of transport for which the park was originally, well, he means the square, was originally designed, pedestrians. Who is legally liable for deliberate planning blunders? Just one major injury or death to a child run down in what is meant to be an ultra-safe environment would rouse public opprobrium, let alone some adverse comments from a coroner for encouraging mixing incompatible traffic. Slow walking, hard of hearing, elderly people, devoid of an all-black split-second sidestepping ability, need to be protected also.
Yep. Okay, Pauline, then Phil.
Thank you, Ian. I'm just ascertaining, are you actually pointing out to us that you believe that the paths are being widened in order to be used for cyclists, or to be better used for cyclists?
I'm going by the plan as it's on this agenda,
yes.
That version of the plan on the agenda, and relying on that wording and on the diagram that shows cycle routes.
Yes, so would you then be of the view that if cyclists were prohibited from using Victoria Square as per the Reserves Act, that the paths maybe perhaps might not need widening? Is that where you're coming from?
No, that's not the subject of my deputation.
Right. It's just about the
that may be raised by someone else. No, it's just the fact of cycle use in Victoria Square if they're vehicles.
Phil?
Thanks for your deputation, and because, clearly in the report too, the issue around shared pathways was raised by a lot of people who submitted on the plan. And I just want to ask you about your suggestion about where the cycleway, in inverted commas, because it isn't a major cycleway, but it's where you think the bikes should go. Were you referring before to the path on the other side of the river?
Well, that's part of the big cycleway for the precinct project, as I understand it from the Associate Minister.
Yes, and I guess we need to see where that is in the plan, because it isn't in this current plan that I saw. It's on the other side of the river.
Yes.
So you're really saying that bikes should really be taken out of Victoria Square, and the cycleway should be just on the other side?
Well, I mean, it's not for me to say. I'm just pointing the legislative framework.
Sure, I was interested in your suggestion.
Yes, yes. I mean, I'm not expressing a view either way over the because the time for public participation is finished, but it seems that this legal matter hasn't been addressed previously.
Thank you.
All right. Look, thank you very much, Anne. And I have to say that I wasn't kind of expecting this as a deputation, so it's been a very worthwhile point to raise. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm rather familiar with that Act because that Act was the one that was involved with the stopping of, well, not stopping, but prohibiting of a road being developed through Hackley Park, and my father was very much involved with the Prime Minister at that time, so and I knew that legislation also sort of gathered up other areas in the park and listed them in the boundaries.
Right.
So that legislation is sort of part of my family's heritage.
Right. Oh, well, thank you for bringing it to the table. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Were you aware of that? Right. Right. Okay. So